Can I ask, please, everyone to take a seat? We will be starting in a few seconds. All right, I think we can start. So warm welcome, especially in a snowy Helsinki, to everyone who found time today to come to our discussion, where we do discuss the future of Ukraine, its democratic future, but we obviously look at how the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine has impacted the peace and security architecture in Europe, and how does it impact Finland's position within the EU, but also Finland's national politics, national priorities, its view on a long-term view on supporting Ukraine. My name is Andriy Kornichuk. I work as a policy analyst on international relations at the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, which is a Brussels-based umbrella organization of the progressive political family. I'm really honored to have excellent speakers today who will reflect on a number of interesting, at the same time, obviously challenging questions, but I do think the expertise, the understanding of these issues will help us delve deeper into many important aspects. Above all, we today meet in the framework of the book that we published together. By we, I mean it's FEPS, Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and Kalevi Sorsa Foundation as our partner. The book is entitled Europe and the War in Ukraine, From Russian Aggression to New Eastern Policy. But I will not speak about this book because I will give the word to our first speaker, who's the editor, and it comes also that Laszlo Andor is the Secretary General of FEPS, who will reflect basically on the origin of the book, but also the type of work FEPS, together with its partners, obviously, as I mentioned, in Finland, does when it comes to support for Ukraine, to the progressive recovery Ukraine, its democratic future, its transformation. So now I would like to welcome Laszlo to the stage, and Laszlo will have about 15 minutes. Each of our speakers, maybe I should also say that each of our speakers will have a short expert input. Then we will welcome everyone to this stage to ask your questions. And also warm welcome to our online audience. Everyone who wants to ask a question, please do that in the chat box and the Q&A box. We will collect these questions as well. So now please the word to Laszlo and about the book itself.
Thank you very much, Andriy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a great pleasure to be in Helsinki and hand in hand with the Kalevi Sorsa Foundation to discuss Ukraine and the future of this country, which unfortunately, since February last year, suffered the invasion, the brutal invasion by Russia, about which this book has been written and published. I have been indeed a co-editor, and I think I was not alone who had observed this conflict in the previous years, but didn't really expect such a brutal invasion in February last year. I think we have to say this very honestly, that many of us were taken by surprise that the Russian president would come to this decision, which was more or less televised, and appeared as a kind of shock for the European Union member states. In Brussels, with FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, we have a responsibility to help developing policies at the European Union level for the progressive office holders, members of the European Parliament, and I'm really happy to see a distinguished member of the European Parliament who will speak later, but also EU commissioners and representatives of our political family, the Socialists, Social Democrats in other EU institutions. And indeed, the way to arrive to this book was through a number of discussions and consultations, including a closed-door discussion with the High Representative of the European Union, Josep Borrell, who came to us, shared his assessment, and also listened to the experts, which we collected for the discussion in May last year. But we also started to work on this very volume from August last year. Why? Because it was quite visible that there is not only a hunger for information about the daily developments of the war, but also there is a kind of competition between various narratives around this conflict. I think people luckily agreed that the European Union has to take side. The European Union cannot be just, watching this war from a distance and sitting on the fence. I think it was, perhaps was not needed to develop a strong solidarity in terms of military, humanitarian, and financial aid to Ukraine, but to develop a deeper understanding of this war. I think we took the right decision to try to add a little bit more analysis from a group of international authors. Of course, the author collective is not entirely international, but it sufficiently covers a number of countries, and we try to ensure that specific topics in this book would be covered by authors who have a more direct insight from about the topic of the respective chapters. Now, we have more than 20 authors. You can download this freely from the website of FEBS. I can only encourage you. But of course, if you have more than 20 authors and a large number of topics, how can we summarize the message of this book in a few sentences? I think there are a couple of key points which the authors collectively wanted to say to the readers. The number one point is that the European Eastern policy failed. And it's not rocket science to conclude that the European Eastern policy failed, but we have to use this bitter experience in order to develop a new one, in order to reconstruct what the European Union believes, intends to do with the Eastern neighbors, and of course at a later stage with Russia itself. But probably that comes a little bit later. We can even say that thanks to this war, the configuration of this Eastern policy has changed. Previously, especially if you look at Germany, but not exclusively Germany, what people thought about Ukraine was some kind of derivative of what they thought about Russia. And now this has changed and completely turned around. In June last year, Ukraine, together with Moldova, was turned into a candidate country of the European Union. We know that already since 2014 there was an association agreement, so that was already stage one. Now there is stage two, and this is already representing a stronger tie and a commitment for the future. We are not knowledgeable enough to tell how quickly another stage and another stage would be reached, but this is a very strong commitment, which probably means that from now onwards this configuration is changing, because from now onwards the first question is the EU's relation with Ukraine, and then comes as a derivative of this what politicians, policymakers will think about Russia and the future relations with Russia. So this is one point. Rephrasing and restructuring of the Eastern policy of the EU, but also its member states. The second point which this book highlights is the global context of this war, because the last thing we should assume is that this is a local conflict. This is not a border issue between Ukraine and Russia. There are global ramifications, and that's why I think it was very important that after the first chapter of this book, which tells you about the ideology and the motivation of Vladimir Putin, comes what the United States has done, and how the United States developed its policies, and to be honest, together with some ambivalence in the US policy, which maybe some observers did not really detect last year, but now there is more and more understanding of the certain degree of ambivalence also of the United States, but the existence of this ambivalence doesn't mean that it would not be so important what the US does and how the US leads a so-called Western alliance in this case. But the global context doesn't only mean the US. There's a very important aspect also with the so-called BRICS, since Russia on the other side is connected with countries with whom they developed much closer collaboration, which originally started as an economic one, but due to this war, probably the political or even geopolitical dimension of this collaboration between Russia and the rest of the BRICS strengthened very, very seriously. And what we didn't know at the time of writing the book, but came afterwards, the enlargement of the BRICS. And with the enlargement of the BRICS also means that it is also becoming a more geopolitical organization rather than a forum to share ideas about economic development and establish a financial institution and so on and so forth. But also through other channels, whether it is the gas market, whether it is the grain market, there are many, many global connections between Ukraine and the rest of the world, and Russia and the rest of the world, which also influences the various positions of country groups, stakeholders in the globe. So the second point is that if we want to understand the politics of this war, we have to be aware of this global context. And the third point which I would like to highlight is the importance of a transformation inside Ukraine. Right? Most of us who are interested in the military developments, of course, pay attention to the daily movements of on the battlefield. And I think a lot of people, whether they served or didn't serve in an army, are interested in what kind of weapons are, appearing on the ground. And for many of us, it's a new experience, right? I personally was trained to use a World War II type mortar when I had to do mandatory military service some time ago in the 1980s. But there's so much we learned, unfortunately, in the last 2 years about the military aspects and drones and all the contemporary technology of war. But the point which we focused on is not this, where there's a lot of daily news, but the importance of the economic, social, and political transformation of Ukraine itself. And this is very interesting because I think the authors who worked on this, and they have of course, a first-hand insight and knowledge of the Ukrainian economy, society, and politics. They indeed demonstrate that a transformation is taking place, and this transformation is trying to already implement a reform, explore alternatives, including progressive options for a new economic policy, which might be chosen in a forthcoming political process, but this transformation which is taking place also is now increasingly taking into account a prospective closer integration or potentially membership in the European Union. So this is also, I would say, a fascinating angle of the politics of the war, which people need to take into account. Now, we already have had, of course, some positive feedback, but of course we are also open to criticism if there is any. And I can add that lately we started to develop how a Ukrainian language version of this could be produced. Maybe not identical, but a strong selection of the best chapters, if necessary with some updates, of course, would be a very, very interesting addition, and it would represent a strong value if we can come forward with that in a couple of months' time. Now, why is it important now? And why we are particularly grateful for Kalevi Sorsa Foundation for hosting this event, because now what we experience is that people start to have a kind of second thought. People are doubtful, since the line between the territories controlled by Ukrainian and Russian armies has not moved much in the last year. There's a lot of speculation about how this war would develop in the next period. We also witness in some corners, inside Europe, but also outside Europe, what people feel as a war fatigue, or people feel as a Ukraine fatigue. And I think this book is a very good antidote. Right? So if somebody feels this, let's just read some of the chapters, and then people will realize the gravity of the situation and the importance of continuing a strong support and solidarity with the country, which is on the one hand fighting for its independence, but also for the broader international order, which is based on international law and the very important principles that through military force you're not changing borders between countries, because this is not accepted in our times. So I think this book, but also similar publications, there is a next one which I think we will mention in the later stage of the discussion, about the longer term implication of the war, edited by the distinguished expert Giovanni Grevi. This is, I think, a very good opportunity to discuss the current stage, but also the prospects. I would also like to highlight that since we had closed the volume, of course there have been some new developments. What, for example, was launched at the European Union to recast the political architecture of our continent is the European political community. And a lot of people now speculate, what this European political community will be good for. There has been recently a Franco-German expert group working on the future of Europe to see how Europe could prepare itself for enlargement. The European Union could prepare itself for enlargement, and also respect better the rule of law and the democracy inside, and at the same time could improve the capacity to act also internationally and improve the decision-making inside the European Union. So this also highlights that the war, which obviously is a tragedy for the people of Ukraine, has already stimulated a lot of thinking, I would say constructive thinking, and I think this conference today could also be part of this constructive thinking, not only to discuss our knowledge and exchange our views about the state of the war in Ukraine, but also to look ahead and think about tomorrow and the next year, and how the developments in the battlefield, but also in European politics could unfold. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you will find this contribution useful for your daily work and research and political debates, and wish you all a good conference for the coming hours.
Thank you, Laszlo, very much. And I think also explaining a bit the logic which we try to apply when coming up with the construct of the event is also to bring different perspectives, perspectives from academia, more from the think tank, policy-oriented, but also obviously from those who stand at the forefront of decision-making, either at European or national Finnish level. And obviously one thing is that giving ownership to the Ukrainian voices. It took a big tragedy, obviously, for many to start viewing Ukraine as a standalone sovereign actor and not trying as a byproduct of a Russian policy, which we obviously discussed. But it has happened, and trying to show that Ukrainian perspective. I would like now to move to our next speaker, who, representing academia, has worked for many years, if not decades, in the realm of political economy. Dr. Yulia Yurchenko, who's senior lecturer on political economy at the University of Greenwich in the UK, author one of the chapters. And to make a teaser, this is one of the chapters that is widely praised throughout our discussions that we have. She has written a contribution dealing with the economic and social losses of Ukraine, but also trying to answer why we should not focus only on an aspect of state security, which is clearly very important, but why the social security and social aspects are as important, and why our sort of approach to Ukraine should encompass all of it, and why the progressive perspective is so important and adds value to thinking about the sustainable democratic development of Ukraine. So I will not take more time, because I think Yulia will herself give you a couple of messages, important messages from her own side, and I invite her to speak now on the social economic losses and also reference to her chapter. So please, Yulia, if you can come up.
Thank you very much for organizing this. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Andriy, for the introduction. And thank you, Laszlo, and the foundations and funders for the opportunity to be part of this important project and the ongoing research projects that we're involved in, that I will speak to in a minute. In my short time, I want to leave as much time for discussion as possible. So I'm going to briefly speak to, I'll give you a little taster of what is in the chapter, and you can read it. I think it's better to talk forward rather than what's already on paper. Next, I want to talk to you about what we can do now and what we are doing now. What role should and is played by the state, civil society, including trade unions, which often kind of get left aside, sadly, in a lot of discussions in Ukraine, and the private sector, of course, in the context of the large-scale de-development by market and war in the country, overwhelming household and state debt, ecocide, labor shortages, and security matters. And I really hope that during the Q&A and the ongoing discussion with the speakers after me, we can somehow work out some ideas as to what we can collectively do together in order to remedy this horrendous situation. When Ukraine was invaded nearly 2 years ago, it was already one of the poorest and most indebted countries in Europe. Now, almost 2 years into the war, it has suffered large budgetary expenditures on arms, humanitarian needs, and medical needs, of course, that keep growing exponentially. This is all exacerbated by the large-scale dislocation of labor force internally and abroad, large-scale infrastructure destruction, including water and energy, and of course during the last winter it was the heaviest, because in their death cult logic, Russians attack when the enemy is most vulnerable, and we see that they've already accelerated attacks on infrastructure. And we expect worse when the winter is fully set. There's been large-scale ecological contamination, including the act of ecocide, which was a destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, putting us all in also nuclear jeopardy as well. And there is, of course, the incalculable losses to incalculable human losses, military and civilian. The number of those, the number of military losses, Ukrainian side keep secret for understandable and good reasons. Humanitarian, you can look up yourself. I also want to mention that at this point, over 26,000 people are listed as missing, out of which over 15,000 are military. And as of last 3 weeks, 2 of those numbers are my relatives. One was lost in battle in Bakhmut, another one in Avdiivka, and we're not sure when and if at ever we will see them again. And those losses that cut through every Ukrainian family, the number of them is growing, those wounds get deeper, and that famed resilience that Ukrainians have and have demonstrated to the world, it is still there, and we do not have another choice but to remain. But that resilience doesn't come from nowhere. It comes also from ability to feed your family, from having shelter, from ability to sleep, which Russians steal from Ukrainians on a regular basis, and from basic things like financing, which of course a lot of European states have been really helping with. A lot of military, a lot of war effort, not just military but humanitarian, is also coming in the form of loans and bilateral and multilateral assistance. Indeed, most of the public spending in Ukraine wouldn't have been possible during the war if international partners weren't helping, for which, as a Ukrainian, I will be eternally grateful. But a lot is also coming in the form of donations, which of course cannot last forever. So it's very important for us to understand what problems Ukraine is facing, which policies to develop in order to address those problems, how to adequately and sustainably finance those needs, how to support those Ukrainians who lost most, and how to support all Ukrainians in their attempts to rebuild in this liquidation phase of the war, but also short and long-term rebuilding prospects. Everybody in this room is I expect, familiar that the last summer in Lugano and this summer in London, there were Ukraine recovery conferences held. And during the London conference, we've held at my research center at Greenwich, we've held an alternative recovery workshop and a launch event for this wonderful book where we've spoken about the losses that are incurred, economic and social and ecological losses, and alternative paths to rebuilding. So we're sort of like in our work, what we're trying to do is kind of see where there are potential gaps, if you like, in the planning that is on the table, and what kind of policies are needed in order to support Ukrainians in the rebuilding effort. And I'm talking about everyday, average Ukrainians as well as Ukrainians as a nation. Last year alone, the GDP shrinkage of the country was at 20%. I reluctantly quote these numbers because, of course, the accurate assessment of full losses we will not know until the war is over. And as I'm speaking, those losses keep growing. The estimates of economic damage they vary from 450 billion US dollars to trillion, potentially more, while GDP this year was at 168.3 million. So we understand that the scope and the scale is quite substantive of what needs to happen. The Ukraine recovery plans that have been developed over the last couple of years have excellent aims in front of them: sustainability, gender equality, green growth, investment in infrastructure, smart recovery, society and environment. Yet some of the means through which a lot of those excellent aims are planned to be achieved, I feel, and I write about this in my chapter, and I develop it in the ongoing project with FAPS, like some of those means will be difficult to achieve because of what is already estimated as 4.5 million labor force shortage. A lot of those workers are in Ukraine now, but for various reasons, either there is a skill mismatch or they're fighting at the front, but overwhelmingly these are the people who have fled the country. And with every passing months of the war, with every bit of incurred further damage, with every new relationship and connection that people develop in the target locations where they ended up as refugees or displaced persons, the will and opportunities to come back can be diminishing. And we already have seen in the surveys conducted across the EU that the number of those people who are willing to come back has diminished over the last year. So one of the crucial things that we're trying to do in the current ongoing project with FAPS is to look at kind of what policies. There is a lot that the government is doing already under very strained conditions, but there are certain things that we feel could be and we show in our work that need to be done and can be done in order to scaffold the work, in order to rebuild the workers so that the workers can rebuild the country and to attract people back from countries to which they fled. So conditions must be created for people to be able to return. Surveys and media reporting and anecdotal evidence all indicate that most Ukrainians are willing to come back when it is safe and they have somewhere to return to. But those conditions must be created. So what needs to happen? We've seen some antisocial messaging from ministers in charge of social politics in Ukraine. We've seen shrinkage of the state. And again, under the strain of the war, it is very difficult to engage in vast public spending, understandably. Yet, when we're planning for the future, we need to understand that not financing certain services is going to not only shrink the social support of population and especially ability of women to participate in workforce and come out of what is classed as unproductive employment into productive, but also will lead to GDP shrinkage and therefore compromise the ability of the country to repay its loans and build a sustainable economy. We're trying to show in our work, and there's lots of studies conducted in other low and middle income countries, that it is not fiscal shrinkage, but fiscal activism and investment in public services and infrastructure that actually contributes to green and purple job creation, leads to economic growth, and within the same fiscal year can pay for itself and lead to acceleration and multiplier effects. So, because one of the biggest issues, of course, beyond becoming populist, is how to finance fiscal expansion. It's a serious question, especially when the country is in a very serious economic pickle. So we're trying to show that actually it is something that is doable, it's possible, more so it is necessary, without attracting the socio-economic system of services, from childcare to elder care to decent pension system to public transport infrastructure. There will be no workers who can implement the recovery plans, however sophisticated they are. And once we show that that comes with economic growth, and that wage-led growth is the money that stays in the community, not in offshores, then you have a winning combination of things. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have around this, because I can talk about this forever. But the project on which we work, it looks at how by investing in green and purple jobs, so care economy and low carbon economy, and care jobs are by definition low carbon. So you can have prosperity and economic growth without destroying environment. But for that, you need to identify where the needs in this society are. So there is, for example, a lot of veterans, there is a lot of medical needs, there is childcare needs, where jobs can be created, wages can be made, people can have, and social housing as well, construction. There is a lot that can be done, that needs to be done, and that can lead to the rebuilding of the country, and that can allow for the plans and aims of the Ukraine recovery plans to be achieved as fast as possible, and relieve the dependency on foreign assistance, including foreign loans. Thank you very much indeed for your attention. I'm looking forward to questions. Thank you.
I think the best recommendation here is indeed, because Julia's contribution and her research is very rich, and the best way is obviously to follow, to read up. And I also am aware that we were kind of on a tight schedule and tried to cover a lot of ground with these contributions. But I think these are very essential also to understand the background against which our discussion is happening. What we will now do is obviously come back to Finland and look from a very practical policy perspective, and asking our distinguished speakers and panelists from Finland, who obviously know themselves well the context in which Ukraine found itself, but also Europe and Finland. And by Finland, I'm speaking now of the situation on the border of Finland, which is happening now, but obviously historically Finland is very well versed in understanding how does Russia, or any version of Russia that was in the past, worked with. So now I would like to welcome, and we are very appreciative that Minister Andres Adlercreutz found time to come to us, and also being at the forefront as the Minister for European Affairs and Ownership, staying on Finland. So obviously well known in the room, but maybe for those who also join us online. As someone who deals with these very difficult aspects on a daily basis in terms of decisions and policy making, we would also kindly ask you to reflect, to bring us the Finnish perspective. Obviously 2 years, the war of attrition works well in favor of the aggressor, almost everyone agrees. But how does Finland adapt, respond, and maybe how you ministers see this policy being developed in next years? Because we hear that the Europe, including Finland, will support Ukraine as long as it takes. So maybe we try to understand what does it take, also from the Finnish society, for political elites and experts, sort of to continue this support. So we now I would like to invite you to share your thoughts.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this event. I think it's really important to keep this issue alive and topical in the Finnish discussion, even though I don't really fear that it will appear from our discussion, more so maybe in some other European countries. In Finland, it's very much on the top of the mind. When you look at our newspapers, very few are the days where something relating to Ukraine wouldn't be on top of Helsingin Sanomat's newsfeed. And I think that is as it should be, because this is an essential struggle, of course, for Ukraine, but in many ways also for what we call Europe, our values, our democratic system, the right to self-determination, which really is also what this is about. This war started in 2014 when Ukraine showed that it wants to be a part of Europe. That wasn't fine with Russia, and they started their invasion on a smaller scale than an invasion that now has reached to a full-fledged invasion and a war of the kind that we haven't really seen in Europe since the Second World War. So it's really about self-determination, which brings me to, of course, one of the big changes that the war has led to, the idea that EU wouldn't be 27 countries, but several more. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he wanted to stop the enlargement of the EU, but he actually sped it up. So here in Finland, from the point of view of a Minister of European Affairs, I'm very happy with the recent decision of the Council to start negotiations with 3 more countries, Moldova, Ukraine and Georgia, because I think we have seen that even though the EU isn't really a security union, it has security implications, and we know we see the facts, we see the bare facts of what it means to be in the middle of the EU, between the EU and Russia, in this grey area. Russia will poke and peek, harass, invade, foster conflict, foster frozen conflicts, whether it's occupying parts of Georgia or Ukraine, whether it's sowing discontent in the Western Balkans, sowing territorial disputes, ethnic struggles, or whether it's a full-scale 19th century invasion, as in the fact in Ukraine. This will be the future for these areas unless we make them a part of the European Union. And that's why I think it's right and it's overall, I mean, most of all, essential that the EU enlarges and that we get the process going. And that's also the stance of the Finnish government. We are positive towards opening accession negotiations and we really hope that it will be a swift process. Of course, it requires a lot. It requires a lot from the EU. It requires a lot from the member states. The process has to be structured. There has to be goals. There has to be incentives. It has to be a two-way street. The Western Balkan enlargement process hasn't gone as we planned. It has been an ongoing process for almost 20 years already. And here, of course, there is, you can blame both the EU and maybe the countries also. The path hasn't been clear. The process hasn't been driven by a strong political will, maybe not on either side. And I hope that we can learn from this and reach a swifter a swifter result with regards to these new candidate countries. So what are the key things? I mean, first of all, I think it's worthwhile recognizing the progress has already been made. I've been Minister of European Affairs for 6 months already. On all my meetings, General Affairs Council meetings where I've been, the enlargement has been an issue. We've received reports from Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine in many of these meetings. And I've been astonished by the progress that has been made in very difficult circumstances. I think that gives us hope for the future process, and it also is commendable with regards to the countries involved. Moldova has made significant steps. Ukraine has done significant steps, even while it has had to fight a war at the same time. So what is required from here forward? When you enlarge a union that is dependent upon having shared responsibilities, a transfer of funds, shared values, the rule of law is essential. That has been a challenge within the union, and that's maybe a topic for a different discussion. We have our own struggles, but of course that has to be the key guiding light also in the enlargement process, that we assure that rule of law is followed in every country. When you talk about transferring funds, of course, corruption has to be minimal. We are talking about a system of a single inner market. Those functions have to be working. So it's not an easy thing. It will not be fast. But the indications that we have had so far are encouraging. So let's hope that we really can get along with the work as soon as possible. And of course, the European Council meeting now in December is the starting point. Then, of course, we have the sad fact that the European Union isn't maybe totally on the same page in this issue. And that actually really goes back to the rule of law question again. We have indications that some countries, Hungary more than anybody else, will be a challenge in this process, and that is really sad and it's really disturbing. We have this rule of law mechanism going on with Hungary and Poland, and as of today, it seems that Hungary especially will put the brakes on this process. But of course, a few weeks still remain until the European Council process, until European Council meeting. So let's hope that we can get these kinks smoothed out. Because this really is about the future of Europe and the safety of Europe, and this is something that everybody should see and be aware of, whatever other disagreements there might be in the background. We have the MFF revision going on, the revision of the multi-year financial framework. There we have there's a proposal of 50 billion going to the restructuring of Ukraine, the so-called Ukraine facility. That is something that Finland strongly supports. There is proposal of augmenting the Ukrainian peace facility, 5 billion per year. The Finnish stance is that this has to be decided upon as a lump sum, 4 times 5 years, 20 billion in total. We do not want that these will be negotiation pawns, horse trading schemes on a yearly basis. So it's really important that we can agree on them for the whole period. I think those are clear indications that the support is strong and that it is there. But even so, I cannot avoid being slightly concerned about the discussion going on in some European countries. From Finland's point of view, there is no reason to doubt Finland's stance here. We will have our own national contributions as we have had today. Until now, the Finnish contribution has been around 2.2 billion euros. Military aid of that is, if I remember correctly, 1.7 more or less. And we are among the top contributors when comparing that to the share of GDP. And somehow I can't avoid thinking that we Eastern European countries, or us in the eastern part of EU, somehow, even though you could objectively say that we would have more reason than any to be prepared for a military conflict, also in the sense that we should maybe hold to our ammunitions and our military material more than the Western parts. We also know what the threat means. So actually all the countries along the eastern border have been giving military aid to Ukraine on a different level compared to some Western European countries. And that just shows how all 27 countries of the EU don't really understand what is at stake. So I would really hope that France, Spain, Italy, many other countries also would step up in this regards. Of course, it's not only about military aid, it's also about the reconstruction. And you spoke about resilience, and I think it's important to understand that reconstruction isn't something that happens after the war. Reconstruction is something that happens now. We have to help to keep society going, to give hope to those that are living in the midst of war. And so we have to constantly rebuild the critical infrastructure that Russia destroys while attacking civilian goals, civilian infrastructure. Finland has been a part of this work already. Finland has been a part of strengthening the education sector already. In Warsaw, where there was a meeting on the rebuilding of Ukraine, Finland had the second biggest delegation, some 40 companies. So our private sector is involved, but of course could do more. The first reconstruction plan will be ready by the end of this year, and the second, of course, will come after that. So we are really planning ahead, and I think, I mean, our planning ahead and our commitment is also shown if I go back to the military aid part. When we gave our first package, we didn't think that this was it. We planned ahead. We have given some 13 packages now, if I remember correctly, and we have planned ahead for the 14th, 15th, and 16th, and so on, because we understand that this is a long. We are in it for the long haul, as is Ukraine, and this requires a lot of planning ahead. So yes, I mean, commitment is needed, and commitment there is, but it really requires that those countries that stand up for rule of law inside the European Union, that really understand the meaning of the struggle going on, also raise their voices on a European level, and I really hope that the European Council meeting in December will not be a disappointment, but a promise of more to come and of a strong commitment to enlargement and the partnerships that are present and that lie ahead. Thank you.
A bit hazardous steps here. Thank you, Minister. I think the commitment and having Finland as a friend of Ukraine and as an ardent supporter from times should not be also taken for granted. It's also important to keep that resolve, to keep that involvement. So I think the society, as well as the political elites and also communities, we keep expressing the gratitude that all the member states are showing. It's a constant struggle, but it's an important fight for overall, for the community as a whole. So our next speaker is obviously, due to current position in the European Parliament, if you look at the treaties, is supposed to wear a European hat, think in European terms, but she knows well, obviously, the Finnish context as well. So we would like, again, to ask our distinguished speaker, Mia-Petra Kumpula-Natri, to talk about maybe a bit on what is happening in Brussels, and also what is happening from the context of European Parliament, which among the European institutions has, I say arguably, has always been a very pro-supportive of enlargement, as mentioned by the Minister, but also pro-supportive of Ukraine and looking at the reforms necessary for the EU to be flexible enough to be adaptive to the new geopolitical challenges. But again, we would appreciate if you give also your thoughts based on the context, based on the title of the book, and if possible, giving a bit that perspective from Brussels, from the EU, maybe trying to tie it up with it with the sort of national politics as well. I would now invite you to speak.
Thank you very much. And I think the previous speaker also knows the mood in the Council side very well. And then the Parliament, the European Parliament is also, of course, composition of the same people, but we are there without governments, and we are then representing European citizens directly. And I think that support is easier and stronger. We have found easily majority every time we talk about Ukraine, and that is promising and it's important. And I think the most important message now that from Finland we changed the government, that there's not much of continuity on many issues, but the support on Ukraine is firm, and it's not, I was saying, to bipartisan, it's opposition and government acting firmly together, and it is the most important message all the time from Finland to abroad and to all our colleagues, but namely also behind the border. So it's not to divide Finnish people, whether it's the border question, whether it's the support for Ukraine, and that's very firm. So I think it's worth of mentioning here in the beginning that the immediate reaction by of the EU was that we will help Ukraine people. We will have the special condition for Ukrainians fleeing to European Union, and it happened quickly. It happened in the middle of the skepticism towards immigration, towards refugee, and it was immediate reaction already in March that Ukrainians are welcome and they have special conditions to do here, and that is what we are continuing. And I'm very, very proud of the European countries and European citizens that we are able to do that. I also feel that we do not change that, and I hope very much that even the Dutch elections would not make that change too much. So I also think that monetary assistance and financing assistance and immunization assistance has been strong and firm. Of course, as a Finn, I see that it's big in amount, not only related to the size that we are doing and delivering, and it has showed many that we as a new NATO country have been all the time skeptical on the border, that never trust too much, never give up your own responsibility. But at the same time, we are quite ready and have been all the time to also make Europe stronger security-wise. So that hasn't changed. Not before our membership in NATO, now not after. So we are ready to go for the deeper structures on that one. And I think the Ukraine only showed it up that it is important. So also when this commission of von der Leyen started, it was like to be more player in the global scheme, more geopolitical. And now it was the call immediately that we should have been earlier and more. But we are developing with a fast speed to do that on the concrete steps. So maybe my thoughts are too much on the transatlantic as I'm traveling back to Washington tomorrow. But it's worth of mentioning here, because when you see the biggest supporters, it's the West and it is also US. So we were, during these 2 years, I've been regularly traveling to the United States and meeting with the colleagues and also the institutions, Foreign Department, Pentagon, everything. So it was a lot of comparison. Who is the bigger supporter? Do Europe bear its burden itself? Are we doing enough? And I think the figures, comparison of figures is good. We can clearly say that Europe has been financing also a lot, and if you count together the member states and Europe Union together, but also we are hosting 4 million Ukrainians and then some financial help on that one, and doing our best on supporting. On the military aid, then US is the biggest helper, and then it's a bit surprising if you listen to Brussels bubble that the next one is Germany, because often it was said that Germany is not doing alone. As a social democrat, I feel that it was also party political sometimes to criticize that Scholz is not doing the thing he should. But then if you look the figure, Germany is the number 2, then UK number 3. So the European countries there. And I am proud to say that Finland, being the country of 5 million, is number 10. So we are doing that with the full-hearted support. The start of the seminar today asked about the fatigue. I'm sharing the minister's view that I don't see that. I don't see any fatigue anywhere. So Laszlo, maybe on the panel we have to talk where you see the fatigue. You don't see it in traveling in Helsinki for these days. So I'm pretty sure. And then the reason is that we are on the border, we know this, and we feel, and I hope everybody in Finland feel that we have to tell the others, we have to tell the other end of the Europe that now we are talking about European borders, and we are talking about Europe. So it's not something far away. And this brings me back to my visit to Washington again. It's sad opinion polls that you read among the Republicans and how the support is diminishing. And it's very sad what you read on the Trump election campaign. So that is also the reason that we have to look that is it to do little steps on the sanctions, 2 little steps continuation of the support, because the support might be even lost from the other side of Atlantic if everything goes wrong. We of course hope not everything goes wrong, but I want to use this dramatic vision for the reason to be there and do much now. So of course I'm gonna meet Republicans who are supportive and they understand that if you are not supporting, you are taking the sides on the wrong side. But also I heard the argument that should then make them that Americans are allergic for sending their own man to the eternal continuation of war situation. It was too many years in Afghanistan and never sold it out properly. It has been too many years somewhere fighting for, so that fatigue is then looked from the perspective that they don't need to send all men if we then provide help to Ukraine to fight, and also this European promise to educate or to train 40,000 Ukrainians on our army and military personnel in the military assistance missions that EU is also doing is very concrete way to help and help in time. So other point after this transatlantic very good coordinated work has been successful, not only the financing and military, but also sanctions. And that has been well coordinated. And now what is really, really neat, and Parliament hope for the Council side, is that to do also on the circumventions and better enforcement is taking place. It's no go that some countries are taking really hard economical hits and then others are doubling their imports that we see now in many energy fields and also that you have a clear cut that our business and their business is doing more than the sanctions are requiring. So many businesses do it voluntarily. They don't want to use their brand to be seen on the other side of the war. So they are doing a lot too. So this is also the thanks for the business society in many schemes. But then that someone else is taking that market and someone else is benefiting from others being clear that it's not acceptable to break the international standards and agreements that the whole world peace is built on. So this is really, really the important steps to need taking on the sanctions list, that they are more, that are broadened, they are more better targeted and better enforced. So we really wait for the results, and Parliament has been much more readiness for many energy side sanctions as well. And also I think it's interesting not to be forgotten this confiscation program. How to confiscate the Russian property in our lands. Now that we have also G7, not to say no, we had Anders Linden, who was ambassador of Sweden in Helsinki, so many know him, taking this study how to do it in the international law and order to confiscate, and I could even link that with the proposal of my party chair here in Finland, Antti Lindman, who proposed that every time Russia is using immigrant, weaponizing immigration and sending people in need to cross the border, that we pay Ukraine more. So even the confiscation, doing really targeted measures, could also fight against if Anders has seen some fatigue that concretely show there. So maybe I will finish my part saying that in Parliament, what I don't see often here, we have groups and people working also for something what is not on this big scale, whether the land can be saved or not, but they are very important and big issues, and I would never be tired. It's the question of the deported children. The figure is 19,000 children that are missed. So there is like activities that how can we bring, and I have been personally with the child ombudsman of Ukraine into talks. There are NGOs actively working on that, and there have been some success to get back, but the big numbers are taking. So don't talk to me on the fatigue when we are having children on the other side. And adoption laws in Russia are horrible. They can change the name, but also the birthplace. So there we need really the international society not to forget. And it was on the UN board, UN already in September 1 year ago, but very quiet also here. And another topic that we have had very good seminars and talks is that it is strategical and clear war also against the nation to destroy the cultural heritage. Think about having the war, that they will destroy everything we have from Kalevala, everything we have from our beloved painters, destroying the Kiasma and destroying our Atheneum. Seeing the picture, soldiers destroying our Atheneum would touch hard our souls. So I think not fatigue, but then really stand with Ukraine. Thank you.
I think the positive is that the word fatigue is challenged so much, and I will also let later Laszlo respond to it. Definitely, last but not least, we have a speaker who's fighting his own battles. I think when we look at Ukraine, we can see that the war is ongoing on on various realms and dimension. It's a collective effort, and there's definitely a diplomatic war also ongoing. So in that sense, there's a lot of difficulties we mentioned, or even challenged whether the fatigue is going on, but the support needs to ongoing from the military to humanitarian to the road to the EU or NATO. There are so many avenues, so many challenges. So we, what I would ask Maxim Kravchuk, who represents the Embassy of Ukraine, also to reflect basically on the issues that he find important in reference to the volume that we present today, but also share his ongoing thoughts on that diplomatic offensive or diplomatic counteroffensive against sort of Russia, because as we see in many theaters across the world, this fight is ongoing, and obviously Ukraine is in the same situation on the battlefield. It does not have a similar vast resources than that Russia inherited from the Soviet Union, also in terms of diplomacy or presence, but it has to get creative. It's working hard, so is the civil society and the actors. So Maxim, if you could come up, also share your opinion, and afterwards we will welcome all our speakers back to the panel and answer questions. So Maxim, please go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for organizing this event and arranging this absolutely topical and very important discussion here. I'm really delighted to be on the same panel with so outstanding speakers. And first of all, I would like to thank our for this publication. It's a brilliant one. It's a brilliant one. I believe that it's very important to collect all conclusions of these articles together. And I would start with one particular conclusion here, that Russia can maintain further war of attrition despite of sanctions, despite of isolation, and so on. So the future depends on their capacity of all partners to bring to Ukraine everything we need for our victory. So I even would ask kindly the minister to rephrase the absolutely amazingly important message or motto of the Finnish government and Finnish nation to help Ukraine as long it takes or needed. Please help us as long as it takes to prevail. Eventually, we are asking everyone, help us to win, because it's a main prerequisite of a just and lasting peace in Europe. The second prerequisite here may be even more important than liberation of all territories of Ukraine, is a restoration of justice. So all available resources of NGOs, of academia, of our legal companies, private companies, should be directed to ensure that hundreds of thousands of war crimes well investigated, that all responsible for these cruel war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and crime of aggression brought to the justice. Only after that we would be completely sure in our security and in our prosperity and in our future. The third prerequisite of a just and lasting peace, as it was mentioned by the minister, is integration of Ukraine to the EU and NATO. So full integration of Ukraine to the European and Euro-Atlantic structures, depriving any thoughts of gray zone, a buffer zone in Europe, would lead to a just and lasting peace. And how we are reaching these targets? Of course, first and foremost, it's a unity. Of course, nowadays we have in this audience a close friends of Ukraine, and we don't need to remind each other that we need to keep unity. But nowadays it seems that we need to combine all our efforts to be in the media, to be in the social media, and to fight against any disinformation, any even effort to destroy our unity. And in this regard, I would like to underline that we are grateful to Finland for standing with Ukraine. And now I want to underline, Ukraine is standing with Finland as Finland on the hybrid operation of Russia, because we are together here. And it's important to keep this kind of unity on all levels, on the national level, on the international level. So please, if you have any ideas, any speeches, and something to deliver to the wider audience, be active in the social media and the media, because we need all these voices. We need this synergy in strategic communication. As I said, we need to expand defense assistance to Ukraine. We need to ensure that everything available brought to Ukraine. For example, one of the key prerequisites or condition of Ukraine's recovery is demining. And we know that even here in Finland, there are a lot of startups, new technologies in the sphere of spectral sensors and other things which could be brought to help Ukraine with demining. So we need to be innovative, and we need to be flexible in looking for the new ideas and resources here. And of course, when it comes to the commitment of Europe to produce ammunition for artillery needs, it's critical right now, because nowadays people in trenches, they need basic stuff. Of course, we need many other things, but please help our soldiers to win this war. And another step, and here the importance of the politicians, NGOs, academia is critical. We need to have a joint vision of a peace. Last year, the president of Ukraine proposed peace formula. If you agree that peace formula could be, and it consists all aspects of a just and lasting peace with these 10 items, I would even suggest to make the next publication how to implement peace formula, if you would agree with me, and pick up every item of peace formula, starting from food security, energy security, nuclear safety, or even bringing back kids there, restoration of justice, and item 10, how we end this war. And from this item 10, I would say that we need to again to change our mode from adaptation to the reality through some policies to shaping the reality. And here we have a very difficult question. How do we do that? Of course, the first step done by the EU is to start an absolutely serious rethinking what kind of the role of the EU should be. And Finland has been for many years quite vocal that the EU needs a powerful global leadership here. But we need to reinvent ourselves, and we need to think what kind of institutions we need, what kind of world order we need, and how we are shaping this world order. And here there is one question, just open question. How do we do that, taking into account that we have terrorist state at the table of Security Council of the UN? And at this point, I would say that only full political isolation of Russia, only a full economic isolation of Russia could reshape this terrorist state, this territory, in something civilized. So here we need to think whether we need to have some kind of blatant and very robust steps to do with the sanctions, are to ensure that Russia doesn't have any access to technologies and spare parts. Nowadays, we see many media reports that Russia has this access. So again, to be innovative, and to look for opportunities to reach out to the other parts of the world. I mean China, India, and Global South. Without very, very active dialogue with Global South, we wouldn't reach a consensus on the universal vision of their peace, like peace formula. So I would encourage all academia, researchers, to be active in dialogue with representatives of these parts of the world. It's not just a part of the world. We need to be in full contact and in very, very serious discussions with all countries nowadays, how we are avoiding some kind of our misinterpretation of the peace. You know that it was a quite difficult quest for Ukraine this year to find the consensus regarding the resolution of General Assembly of the United Nations resolution on Ukraine on the first year of this full-fledged invasion. We tried to put into the resolution peace formula, and here we as you know, we started a very serious discussions. Now it would be a continuation of discussions how we are implementing that peace formula and how we are conducting a summit on peace to think how we are implementing all 10 items. And I would say that this strategic and political framework, I would end with very important thing, that when it comes to reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine, let's agree upon that we talk about building a new EU member state, and we are thinking how we can invent a new economic model. So again, for the next publications, whether we can collect best economists of Europe to think what economic model for Ukraine would be the best to make Ukraine the greenest economy in the world, to make economy the technological leader, and so on. And it should be a very positive, very, how to say, exciting cooperation between all stakeholders. And I believe that in this synergy between passionate friends of Ukraine, passionate contributors to our common future, we would reach a just and lasting peace. Thank you for your attention.
May I ask our panelists to come back? We still have 10 minutes, and Minister has to go in about 5-10 minutes. So immediately, I would maybe ask if someone has questions. I will use sort of that I'm moderating, that these questions or question that one or two that Minister can take still while he is here. Maybe if you could please raise your hand. And I just quickly, just a small note. Some of the questions that Maxim have raised are already targeted within the publication, which is called Forging Europe's Leadership, Global Trends, Russian Aggression and Risk of Regressive World, which we did at FAPS, and which Laszlo already mentioned, which also kind of deals with many of the ratifications on the international scene. So in that sense, maybe if, please raise your hand if anyone has questions that could be addressed also to the Minister before he leaves. Yes, please, Lauri. So maybe I'll give you.
Yes, I'm the director of Sorsa Foundation, organizer of this event together with FEPS. I have two questions, one for maybe everyone and one for Minister Adlercreutz. There have been several proposals on changing the EU enlargement procedures, for example, different levels of or different stages of EU membership. So my question is, what is the Finnish stance on these proposals? And maybe for everyone, how do you see these proposals in relation to ending or helping Ukraine's reconstruction?
Maybe you do take, because we understand that you will leave shortly,
yes,
so please go ahead.
Well, Finland hasn't really an official stance on this, but I can say what I think about them. I mean, in general, Finland has indicated a fairly positive stance against gradual integration. But then when you go into deep, but it's all, of course, about the details. In general, Finland hasn't been a fan of a multi-speed Europe where you have different levels of membership I personally, I'm a little bit concerned about having a Europe with these concentric Macronian circles where you have those in the middle and then different levels of membership around it. I think when you talk about the single market, and I think it was Barnier who said in Financial Times that the main reason that Biden and Xi respects the European Union is because of the single market. And then if you create different levels of memberships, lots of permutations of relations between the memberships, then you essentially easily erode the inner market. So I would be very careful about that. But gradual integration, if it's a way of speeding integration, giving things to the future member countries that incentivize them to speed up their reforms, helps motivate the governments and the people, then it might be a good idea. But I think you have to be quite nuanced and thoughtful about what you then give out in the process, so that you don't create a permanent waiting room that would stop the incentives of doing further reforms and then gaining membership. Then there's of course other things that we need to do also. And this is more maybe a comment about the general discussion on the sanctions and military aid. We think that in issues related to foreign policy and security policy, we really should go in for qualified majority voting. And I think that clearly shows now in the ongoing discussions about the sanctions. They are leaking, and it's hard to patch the sanctions regime when certain countries don't go along with the general mindset that we have. And also relating to aid to Ukraine, I think we have the same problem. So I think these issues should really be taken care of through a qualified majority voting process. But of course we are not there yet. I mean, first we have to be unanimous about the need not to be unanimous, and that's of course a slightly difficult equation.
Just wanted a short comment, and Minister, obviously we know that that you have to leave, so I just thank you for finding time and your presence. It's deeply and very much appreciated from all of us. So thank you again. And Julia just wanted to have a very short comment before you leave. So
this is also dovetails with what you were just saying about helping potential members to kind of get where they need to faster. We've seen that there's been certain extraordinary measures on the legislative level taken in Ukraine because of the martial law, which is an absolute necessity. Yet at the same time, we understand, for example, in terms of labor standards, environmental standards, a number of others, especially labor standards, if we want to send a strong signal from the EU to Ukraine and from Ukraine to Ukrainians in Europe that we want you back, and where you are, you will have the same standards, if not better, in Ukraine. It's a very strong message for people that they are wanted home, and they can, that there is hope in the country that's fighting for its existence. So I think there is a lot of value added and positive externalities, as economists like to say, in supporting Ukraine to bring its regulations as fast in alignment with the EU, which are the best world standards we can find as possible.
Thank you. We will excuse Minister because he has to leave. We will spend around 10 minutes more. If someone still has questions, please raise your hand. But we can also round up, perhaps, with the aspect. I think that yes. Please go ahead.
My question would be So I'm a student, and I'm just wondering, what are we doing as Europe in general, as Finland in particular, about the fact that we could be losing the transatlantic support in a little bit? What's the plan? What are we doing to prepare? Because the crisis is not going anywhere, but that support could be.
Just give a short comment, and
yes,
actually Mia-Petra also talked about this, and then I have to leave. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen, but I think it's fair to say that it's a clear possibility. Then again, I have a fairly high level of confidence in the general machinery of the State Department, so maybe even even if Trump returned to the presidency, maybe his words are not then as concrete and harsh as his rhetoric has been. But even so, I mean, I think that we Europeans, we have to be better in many of the ways, that many of the things that we have relied on the US upon. I think you mentioned ammunition. I mean, we gave a promise of 1 million rounds, and we are being able to deliver 300,000. I think that's a colossal, catastrophic failure. The European Union, we have more than 10 times the GDP of Russia. We have a fairly significant industrial capacity, and we can't reach that goal, mainly because of the governments not putting in the orders. I think Finland is doing its share. I mean, we are producing as much as we can around the clock, but of course we are a small country and we have big industrial powers in the middle of the Europe that are really not delivering, and that just shows that we are not rising to the occasion, but still to an all too big extent relying on the US. A help that might not be at the level we assume in 1 or 2 years. So we have to be prepared for that anyway, but I don't really see us realizing that. But let's hope that reality turns out differently. But I mean, we should be better at taking care of our own house, and we are not really there yet.
I had a promise to ask Anders, can you have one more question from me, 30 seconds? Because Ukraine enlargement, you said that not official, but the e-letter was sent to the parliament, and they started to handle, I think, today on that one too. So that, yes, positive note to starting the enlargement, but it's not enough. Ursula von der Leyen said that she will start analytically going sector by sector what it requires from the European Union to be ready for this enlargement. And then from the embassy we heard that might need also the geopolitical EU need to new thinking. So are you the one speaking more loudly in Finland what is happening in Europe? Because I feel that in Finland it's like no-go, anything new comes from EU. So, but then we read the opinion polls, and this is to encourage you. We read opinion polls that raise of 18% for the support of EU. So the NATO is maybe more than 100. But even that Finnish people, 18,000 unit more who see that EU is beneficial and important. 68 nowadays. It was only 50.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, we are lacking in the discussion around enlargement, and we haven't really discussed what it means. I've tried to discuss it a little bit myself, and I mean, our stance when we evaluate EU, I mean, we usually only look at our net payer status, and that's all that we care about. And in the enlargement, it's of course a question about so much more. We are talking about the future of Europe in a very concrete way and the security of Europe. So we have to realize that we will be paying more, but we will also get more in return. We'll get a safer Europe, a bigger market. I mean, you could even say that we might get help in many other aspects too. We'll have to realize that our agricultural policy will change, cohesion policy will change. Many countries, other countries in Europe, I think it's about 7 or 8 of them that now are net recipients, will become net payers. Many other countries, of course, has to realize that in a much harsher way than us. But even so, I mean, we have to understand that Europe and the EU will change, and it also has to affect the decision-making process. And now I'm mainly talking about issues relating to security and foreign policy, maybe issues relating to trade, also external trade from the EU, trade relations and trade deals and so on. So it is a change, and so far I think the national discussions isn't really on par with what we should really, I mean, what we should realize and discuss relating to this.
Thank you very much. Yes, so we will not keep you more. And unless there's questions, because we are now right at the time where we're supposed to end, but maybe I would also ask for you to spend 10 minutes more, so we will do this another round with our speakers, and maybe let's make it open-ended. So based on what you heard today, we don't know how much time, so 2-3 minutes. If there's any messages that you would also want to address, any specific issues from the bigger ones on the geopolitical, transatlantic relations, future of multilateralism to a more practical one, the approach to Ukraine's enlargement and any cause, please do that share with our audience. Maybe I'll start with Laszlo and then sort of with a Ukrainian message here. But Laszlo, go ahead, 2-3 minutes. Anything you would like also to emphasize or share at the very end?
Okay, thank you very much. I learned a lot from all the interventions today. I would like to add one point which I think has not yet appeared in the discussion, but I think it is important now and also in the coming period, which is indeed how Europe actually absorbs and copes with the costs of supporting Ukraine and continuing, because this is going to be very important. And if we look at the behavior of some of the political leaders, and sometimes it's difficult to understand, why certain leaders hesitate, or why certain leaders maybe not fatigue, but some unexplained behavior appears. I think many of the European leaders, but also elsewhere in the world, even those who want to provide maximum support to Ukraine, they want to reconcile it with two other important objectives. One is to avoid an escalation, which means that the war would spread further or intensify in a way or go into nuclear and all the rest of it. So people may have these types of concerns. And the other concern is that if they need to cover the costs in their own budgets, to share these costs evenly in society without imposing a burden on the more vulnerable parts of the population. So the fair distribution of the cost is also very important, exactly to avoid that at some point certain social groups would say, oh, thank you very much, this is not so important for us anymore. So I think this might, in the next period, when European Union countries are moving towards the European Parliament elections, is going to be an important topic, because the European citizens feel a kind of cost of living crisis. It has it has a lot to do with the post-corona economic situation. But some kind of social contract in Europe is going to be necessary in order to address concerns of the population and ensure that these important objectives are possible to be reconciled, not only now, but also in the future.
Thank you very much. So maybe, yes, we continue.
Okay.
Yep, one, two key messages to leave
now
us
with. Now I have
thoughts.
difficulties to, should I ask or continue as a Finnish audience or the world audience online for the FEPS, because there is a very big differences on the what I see in Brussels and what I see in Finland. In Finland, you have the eastern part of Finland that lost everything. And what was the solidarity of Brussels? It was nothing. And it's not even recognized there. If you have the biggest harbor of Finland lost 90% of the traffic. And after Brexit, there was like a buffer to help the countries because they lost something. And this didn't diminish power of supporting Ukraine at all. This is maybe creating some unbeliefs that, there is like nothing now when we need help. So I'm afraid that my own political party also sees this only like the more money and Finland is rich. If you look only at the GDP. But then if you look at the eastern part of Finland, that now they are like having this border crisis, that it's a weaponized immigration. Electricity was cut, gas was cut, transit of the ports goods was cut. Tourism was cut, everyday traffic was cut, personal linkages were cut, cultural exchange with Karelia, which used to be part of Finland, was cut. And we don't see this kind of, okay, now we understand that you did something as a border. We are still on the same agenda that who's getting RRF money or next generation money and so. So this is just my Finnish greetings from the audience. It has nothing to do that we still think that Russians are attacking the borders and they are able to think of other parts of Europe as well. The Ukrainian soldiers and nation is not fighting only for their country, they are fighting for the world to remain in the international order, that you don't cross the borders that has been signed and done. So I hope that also the Brussels movement and my own political party and the other parties keep on strong on these basics, also transatlantically. So, but you are very right on this, that the cost of living and the state budgets that are in difficulties everywhere, that when they are asked, the national states to ask to pay more for the funds for Ukraine and more for the European Union for this and that, it's also always a difficult round. And that's why it's quite important that we can do this 50 billion package, not inside the budget. There we, for example, the Finnish government is also always being like a little bit hesitant to pay more for Brussels as the frugal net payer or whatever, but on these certain questions of existence, it's accepted. So we don't feel that funding the Brussels all in the innovative ways of using the money, or very non-innovative, the cap or something old-fashioned to say. But then in this one, I think the support is here. So maybe these are my greetings from inside, but then I want to finish with something positive that I always do when I speak on the Ukraine, that I was so happy that again you mentioned that digitalization and building up this modern society is happening daily basis. So it's part of the nation in the war, part of the state country in the war, but Ukraine is developing all the time. And I work a lot on tech, and I see that Ukraine is a superpower in the technological knowledge and capacities, and very much delighted that I'm on the same side with that knowledge of technology and digital application. If audience here doesn't know, we are all should be jealous that you have the digital passport and you have the application, DIA application, that you can just click as easily as order Uber. You can do the administrative burdens and tasks. So even Finland is top ranking in many digitalization with the governance and our public services. Ukrainians are better.
Maxim?
Hello. Today I had a very interesting role. Why Finland is so special? Because, by the way, some speakers consumed 80% of my messages from my speech. Thank you very much, Finland, for being so special and understand us so keenly and deeply, and for all support you provided, and for standing with Ukraine so strongly. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank not just Finland, but the whole Europe for hospitality, for Ukrainians who fled the war, for defense assistance you provided to Ukraine till now, for microfinancial support and assistance, and all kind of assistance you provided to us. And I would like to remind one thing: winter is coming. We need more and more assistance to survive this winter. Material assistance to our households, generators and warming our appliances for our soldiers on the battlefield. And one specific thing: our kids nowadays facing a big challenge are having access to education. So if Finland, European countries, different networks could provide some donations in the form of laptops, we would appreciate to give our kids in shelters to have access to education. And regarding the cost of the war, unfortunately, this war started in 2014 because of many geopolitical mistakes, unfortunately. Unfortunately, now Ukraine is paying at the highest possible price for these mistakes. Unfortunately, we need to fix and reshape and reinvent the whole world order and European architecture. So the truth is very simple. If Ukraine fails, the cost would be much, much higher for everyone. Of course, we are absolutely sure in our victory. We would liberate all our territories. But for that, we need very, very resolute, firm, and very prompt actions from Europe and all our partners around the globe to ensure that we are not just surviving, that we are winning this war. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with what previous speaker said, but specifically with the last message about the significance of supporting Ukraine and significance of Ukraine winning. This message as to why should somebody help Ukraine win this war should be turned on its head, because you cannot afford not to. I absolutely agree, as in you with a collective West, EU, you name it. There were these mistakes made in 2014. We also remember Minsk agreements, and we remember the Nord Stream and continuing relations with Russia. And it's not the first time that Russia has violated international law and got away with it. The longer internationally permanent security member states of the United Nations are allowed to violate the rules that they are supposed to protect, the less likely and fewer states will be willing to abide by that order. So indeed, the international security is at stake. The opposite of universalism is this multilateralism. What multilateralism is chaos, barbarism, and growth of regional fascist regimes, where governments are allowed to abuse their own populations in whichever way they like. This is precisely the kind of thing that the UN was built to prevent from happening. So there needs to be rethinking about what is happening in the UN. There needs to be democratization of processes at the UN if international rule-based order is not to become something of the past. So, and if Ukraine does not kick Russia in the teeth, if there is not something that is perceived politically at the very least as the loss of Russia in this war and the consecutive agreements, this can spill into something significantly more serious and more viscerally palpable for people outside Ukraine, like it is right now for people in Ukraine and those who had to flee. So no, the world cannot afford to not help Ukraine. This is the main message that I want to leave us with. If some sovereignty of some nations is less valuable than the rest, the whole thing falls apart. So this is about preconditions of peace, not only in Ukraine, but also internationally. Domestically, also, there are preconditions of peace in Ukraine, and that is a stable economic system that will allow to rebuild what was lost. And that will also include the justice process at the end, at which you already have spoken, including Russia paying for the recovery. And I've heard some talks since the beginning of this war that, oh, remember how Germany was punished in the First World War and that led us to something else. Well, Russia is not bombed. Russia is actually still making money. Russia is not Germany, and those comparisons are not helpful. The comparison that is helpful is writing off of German debt at the end of the Second World War. Even the offending country was allowed to be alleviated from the burdens so that it could rebuild, because socioeconomic stability was understood as precondition of peace, domestically, regionally, and internationally. International Labour Organization also came out of that legacy. So I hope that these messages will, and there is all reasons to believe that it will materialize in the final resolution of this war. I want to see them materialize. A stable Ukraine, rebuilding, and a low-carbon, prosperous, knowledge, arts, humanity and care-based principles. And in that way, it will be an example of how we as humanity, we as Europeans, we as people, deal with catastrophes, where we're coming together, helping each other rebuild, because there is no peace when there is war in one corner of our planet. Thank you.
And I think also a round of applause to all other speakers. We spent 15 minutes more, but I think we made it worthwhile of your time. Thank you everyone for coming. And also thank you for all the people behind the scenes who help us this happen, including our partners, Kalevi Sorsa Foundation, which will together continue working for Ukraine and on behalf of Ukraine and everyone who's tuned in online. So thank you very much, everyone who came today and spent this time. And I think we have a lot of things to think, but we will continue. We continue the struggle, we continue the fight. Thank you very much.